1 year podcast anniversary. What shall I say? Well, I have to say this went beyond any expectation I could ever had. And no worries, this is not going to be an episode where it's just look at me, look at my podcast. It's just me with a bit of saying thank you. And then we get straight into the topic where this week we're going to look into what's going on in the world of leadership and especially recruiting and developments between different generations at work. However, let's start with a 1 year podcast anniversary. What happened during the last year and what is going to happen? So what happened in the last years? More than 25,000 people listen to this podcast, either in German or English. It's a bilingual offer, as you can see on every major podcasting platform. More than 25,000 people spent their time with me, and I have to say thank you. We have people from 40 countries all over the globe. I am, of course I'm very happy, but you see, I am a bit speechless, which hardly ever happens. And these 25,000 do not include the ones we have on YouTube. We had a couple of people asking, why do I put my podcast on YouTube? And by the way, we now also have what some people asked for. Some people said, could we do a video cast, which means interviewing experts with video? And yes, we did that as well. Look on my YouTube channel. If you subscribe there, I would be very happy, of course, as well. So if you look at my YouTube channel, go on playlists, you find video casts with extensive interviews with different experts, and more will be added to that channel in the future. So when we talk about more than 25,000 people excluding YouTube, the reason why I put it on YouTube, because some of you ask, is the following. I was contacted by people who told me that due to, for example, limited ability to see, because, for example, a certain number of dioptrine and certain apps are not very accessible. And of course, accessibility, diversity, and inclusion is a very important aspect of my business. And I agree, many of these apps are not very self-explanatory, while YouTube is. YouTube, you open a website, on top you type in a name, and then you find what you were looking for. So it only takes me one tick to set when I publish my podcast. So I publish it on YouTube as well. 200 to 400 people listen to this podcast on YouTube per month, which I never expected. So if we now assume that 250, 300 people a month come on top of the numbers I already have, because I only just told you about the official numbers I saw in the podcasting app we use. Probably we have something in between 25,000 and 30,000 people listening to this podcast in the first year, but I go with the realistic number we have here with the number that is offered by the podcast platform we use, and that is 25,000, more than 25,000. And I say thank you. What is going to happen in the future? We always look at what happened. So we will always relate everything we do with real news. And then, of course, we will take a look into science. And then we talk about sustainable leadership. And one thing I have to add, because some people ask what will not happen. I'm not going to do any kind of advertising here. I had a couple of offers, and I'm not generally ruling it out. If you're interested in advertising, I'm happy to do that. However, it will be marked as advertising. Please stop contacting me, telling me that I should do podcasts where you tell me the questions and then I interview you and it's all just covered up while you pay me. So first, that's illegal. It's not legal to do that. Second, I'm not interested in doing that. So please don't contact me with dodgy deals, because no one needs them. Also, certain people gave unsolicited advice. And I always guarantee you that when you email me, I guarantee you that I'm not going to publish your name, which I kept to 100%. However, certain people sent me emails trying to sell something to me. That was not overly successful. During the last year, exactly 0 times that worked. And also certain people thought they give unsolicited advice. And this unsolicited advice especially was about 3 aspects, and these aspects were: number 1, don't be controversial; number 2, don't talk about politics, which is probably connected to number 1; and number 3, you should just leave the LGBTQIA plus bit out because it's too controversial and you will lose listeners. So look, when you don't like what I say, I'm happy to have a discussion with you, but if you're not controversial, you are just another opinion podcast where you don't want to harm anyone. And by the way, I don't want to harm anyone, but when someone does something wrong, I'm going to publicly address it. No podcast is helpful when you don't come to a very clear conclusion. If I would tell you, oh, there's a certain problem and, it's a problem, it is a problem. Like a problem. Thanks for listening. See you next week. This is not how anything works. I have, of course, suggested to you how to solve the issue. And you may agree on the suggestions I make, and you may disagree, and then we can have a civilized discussion. However, telling me not to be controversial and then in the next step mentioning I shouldn't talk about politics most likely only means that you disagree with my political opinion, which is fine, and we can have a discussion about that. But leaving politics out is pointless, because politics is probably one of the most important aspects when running a successful business and being a person in free enterprise. If you have no political opinion and you say you are apolitical, that already is a political statement, and it's not a good one. Because normally when people say they are not interested in politics, they are either uneducated or ignorant or both. And of course, there's a special group of people who say, oh, I am not political. And then they come with the most ridiculous and extremist ideas, which means they are either far left-wing or far right-wing. And extremist politics never have a sustainable solution in mind, because they are only in for their own benefit. So we will continue to talk about politics. And of course, I'm going to mention LGBTQIA plus communities, and I will mention women's and human rights, because when we don't talk about the rights of women and minorities, society is not going to develop in the right direction. Okay? So some people ask, what can they do? When they saw last week that we're going to have the 1 year anniversary this week, they asked, what could I do to help you? So first, of course, if you put this podcast on social media, tell your friends, tell your colleagues, put it to the business world. Just tell people when you like it that they should listen to this. This is great help. And of course, if you want to, just follow me on social media, and of course, register for Expert Excellence. I deliberately do not call it newsletter, because newsletter simply sounds like advertising, and I never advertise in anything I do. I offer content which in my opinion is of high quality, and the feedback I receive confirms that opinion. And due to that, people book my services. And of course, I would be very happy if you book my services. But first, getting back, when you want to register for the business, for the Expert Excellence email I send out every Wednesday, just go on expert.nb-networks.com. That's where you can just put down your email address, and I guarantee you 100% content, ad-free guarantee. I never advertise on any channel. I offer content, and this is why people get interested, because they know they do not get advertising on my channels. So, talking about what do I do? I talk about sustainable leadership. As you see, of course, there are different aspects connected to sustainable leadership. Of course, there's leadership, communication, conflict management, handling projects, being able to do excellent presentations, being able to lead, and of course, to sell your services. So sales is one part of it as well. The best thing is we have a discussion about what you think we could do together. And as you know, I mentioned in the podcast normally at least once, training is one of the major aspects I do. Of course, speaking during events or fairs, expos, coaching offers, consulting, mentoring, and of course, project and interim management are the services I offer. I am very happy if you're interested. Just drop me an email at nb@nb-networks.com, and we then have a chat. Of course, I'm available on all different ways of delivery, so it's either on-site or online or a hybrid solution. Everything is available. Let's just have a chat. But now we get straight into the topic of this week, and we look what's happening right now in the world of recruiting, because we all know that we need talent. You need talent, your organization needs talent, every single person needs talent. However, it's not going too well in the world of recruiting. I am now dealing with sustainable leadership for more than 20 years, and people tell me, isn't it getting better and your job becomes obsolete? No, it really goes, for whatever reason, it goes the other direction. When you look at what is happening right now, and I'm only giving you a couple of examples. So one recruiting company in the US didn't only ask for ethnicity, for whatever reason that might be relevant, they were also asking for complexity and the description of the skin color of the person, from white to slightly brown, bit more brown, medium brown, dark brown to black. What on earth is going on in someone's head who puts that online and think that this is remotely acceptable? And of course, the company says we would never deny a job to anyone based on their skin color, which pretty much sounds like we're not going to tell anyone if we do, but we want to have the details before we meet a person. And that is simply unacceptable. When you ask for details like ethnicity or complexity, skin color, there is something speaking between the lines, which simply does not sound right. And you know why? Because it isn't. These aspects are not relevant when you hire someone unless you have certain clients who say something like, we're a traditional company and in the center of the US and, ding, 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 ding. Oh, sorry, that was just my banjo playing. And we have like white people here and we really don't want that, other people come here because we are a traditional white family business. When you want to serve these people, it's your business, but don't be surprised when you get called out. And don't tell me that this is the standard, because some people said it is common to do so. It is not. Discrimination is common, and that doesn't make it better. Just because it happens, it doesn't mean that you have to accept it and move on. When people say, just accept discrimination and move on, these people couldn't even be remotely considered for any kind of expert position anywhere in the business world. I'll just give you an example how random aspects of recruiting have become. So there were people who were denied their jobs because the employer said they need to cut off their dreadlocks. And the job was, buckle up, call center. Service center, call center, on the phone. People would not even see the other person talking. However, their haircut doesn't fit to the company culture. And here's one thing which people from the privileged white group really have to understand. Culture is more than the unchangeable aspects like skin color or your origin. Especially hair in different communities has a highly cultural, highly traditional, highly identifying meaning of who they are. And if you don't get that, read up. Because just saying, oh, in Europe it's not the case, or where I come from is not the case, it doesn't mean that this applies to anyone else. Once more, I can't stress this enough. It is not about you in leadership. And when you say you cannot hire someone due to their haircut, you must have a pretty extraordinary, well-paid position where a very selected group of bigots or racists or simply people who are very judgmental suddenly turn up. And it's definitely not a call center role going by minimum wage. So other labels did better. A very well-known clothing brand, for example, there was a manager in a store who fired an employee because the employee refused to change their haircut. The employee complained, which is exactly the right thing to do. The corporate headquarters overturned the decision. The employee is back on board and the manager got fired. And that is exactly the right thing to do. However, of course, we contacted that company and asked, why didn't you give the manager additional training? Because that would be something where probably that person learns a lot more than just being fired. But then the company told us that they already gave that person additional training due to one of these occurrences happening before, and with a repeated offense, the corporate policy is to fire these people, which I can understand. When you qualify people and they don't learn from the qualification measures, and I asked, it was an on-site training with a very good and quite expensive coach, so it was not just an online video or something like that. So some organizations already got it, and many organizations do, that outer appearance is not of the highest relevance, and especially not when you have jobs where people don't even see each other. So be aware, culture is more than the unchangeable aspects like skin color or origin. And when we now look into recruiting, there are certain aspects, and then you look at the way they are communicated, certain aspects go the right way. So for example, Linklaters now has the first female senior partner. That was published on May 13th, 2021 via LinkedIn with a public article about it. So congratulations to the law firm Linklaters that in the year 2021, you hired the first female senior partner. So first, of course, it's good that it happened right now, but undeniably, really, I really wonder, is this the kind of news we still want to have today? That we say, oh look, we hired a female person. Everyone goes like, hey, great, amazing, you're such an no. This should have happened probably 40 years ago, or even earlier, probably 1971, not 2021. However, it is good that it happened right now. Still, it tells us that in these organizations, and this is not specific to Linklaters, look at major law firms and their diversity, especially towards women and minorities. They are not doing well. And this is where they need help when it comes to leadership. Drop me an email and we can talk about that. But at least change is on the way. But also there are changes which are not great. I just give you an example, and especially when it comes to income. And I know what happens after I will say the next phrase, or the next fact, sorry. Some people will send emails to me and say, oh, when I had my first training, I earned $50 a month. It's not relevant. Or when people say, oh, I lived with my parents until until I was 32, no one cares. It is not relevant what you did 40, 50, 30, 20 years ago. We talk about now. And I just give you an outlook what we're doing right now. We are going to an area of income which becomes increasingly dangerous for peace in society. People are asking for more and more qualification while at the same time giving less and less income away. And this is not how society works. When people are properly qualified according to what you want them to be qualified, they have a right that you pay them well so they can live an independent life. And I'll just give you an example. One thing which just was published in the group, The Professor is In. There are two excellent Facebook groups, The Professor is In and The Professor is Out. Both groups are on Facebook. It's about the world of academia, what happens inside academia and how to get out of it into the real enterprise world. So when the University of Idaho was looking for a lecturer, they were looking for a lecturer in Idaho, of course, for their subjects German and Spanish. A lecturer should teach Spanish and German. Of course, preferably native speakers. Many experiences are requested, especially working in both languages, etc., etc. And of course, they expected a PhD, so bachelor, master, PhD. And you know how much this costs, especially when you are in the United States of America. And now you can think of being a lecturer at university, bachelor, master, PhD, with all the student loans you have to pay off, everything which is connected to it, with all the experiences you should have. And now think of what is the income range they are willing to negotiate. And the income range they suggested was between $32,000 and $36,000, not per month, of course, not per quarter, per year. And that is just becoming a problem. The income which is offered to people who are properly qualified gets lower and lower every year. And this is becoming an increasing problem. And the generations in power often say, well, when I was your age, it's not relevant what happened when you were that person's age. It's relevant how life is right now. And we have numerous problems with different generations in the workforce right now. I'll just give you a couple of examples. One example. A professor of a very well-known German university about machine engineering said he can't get used to this online thing. He means Zoom sessions where you sit together instead of having lectures on site. So the professor says, and professors means this person has a lifetime assignment and an excellent income, gross income before taxes. It's not unrealistic to assume they are in the 5 digits per month. So this professor said at a very prestigious German university for engineering, said, I just can't get used to this online thing. Please read through this, and we then just meet for 2 sessions Q&A, and then we do the exam. Attaching to this email PDFs which contain 3,000 pages to read through. And when students then complained to the dean of the faculty said, you need to address that with the professor himself. And of course, they did that already, and the reaction was horrible. And this professor is unfortunately known for when he doesn't like people, he gives the most ridiculous marks in the lowest area possible. So the dean of the faculty didn't react. So what happened? It escalated on social media. This is how it goes when you don't communicate and lead properly. And then the leadership team of the university had to engage with the issue. And now the professor was told that he has to learn how to do online lectures. And of course, the professor is now even more angry, and no one knows what is going to happen when in a couple of weeks suddenly there will be an exam and how difficult it will be, and no one knows how the marks will be. But only sitting, just assume that you work in free enterprise, your employer tells you, we have a global pandemic, we're going to meet online, and you tell your employer straight to the face, oh sorry, can't get used to that, not going to do it, see you. You would be fired on the spot for a very good reason. And people would call you insane for a very good reason. And still we have people in the workforce who think it's the most normal thing to do, to tell young people, I can't get used to the online thing, so I'm not going to do it. And these people teach future engineers. And by the way, to all the listeners from Germany or the German-speaking area here, when you look at this, you might be aware of the fact that German universities, except the Technical University of Munich and the LMU in Munich, most German universities, even the one which are called Excellence, which is in Germany internal excellence initiative that no one in the international world really takes seriously, German universities don't happen in the top 100 usually of global universities. And you know what the reason for that is? The reason for that is that people accept that certain generations don't have to change anymore. And especially when you look into science, that is the worst approach you can have. And we have many different other issues. When you look at the German Football Association, now the president has to step down after making Nazi comparisons and with one of the worst Holocaust judges towards the vice president. First, he didn't want to step down. Now there's a legal procedure internally going. So he now will step down, which is now way too late. And now, of course, the chairman has to step down as well. And the vice president will step down and the treasurer will step down. And now, when the German Football Association hit the peak of the next catastrophe and scandal, now people say, well, who's going to be the successor? And surprise, surprise, no one shows up. No one wants to do that job. They asked 4 different people already. They all said no. Surprise, surprise. Because they all know that they are sitting on a ticking time bomb where a lot of wrong stuff will come to surface and then you as the president will have to deal with it. And suddenly people say, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have a female president? I mean, what an insight. You hit the peak of the issue and then you have the idea, hey, why not hand this to a female president? Maybe there's a reason why people say that, but I really don't want to assume that this is their motivation. However, we now have different female candidates who are, let's say, considered. They haven't answered so far to the call. Some of them even had the idea to run for president before, but weren't allowed to do so. It is, when you read into these stories, you really think someone made that up in some sort of horror science fiction movie. No, it is simply nothing else than an organization which is completely male. When you look into the leadership team of the German Football Association, 71 positions I think they have right now with all the regional presidents, 1 female person, and that's Hannelore Ratzeburg, someone who was fighting for women's soccer since the 1970s. And if she decides, which I could totally understand, that at her age of the beginning 70s, now she might have the will to retire and do something else than fighting and fighting and fighting. She most likely has no interest in having the presidential position and most likely will enjoy her well-deserved retirement. I interviewed her on the German podcast, version of this podcast. However, we really need to see that some significant change happens, and that normally can only happen when the whole board steps down and you have to exchange people on numerous levels. Exchanging just one person will not solve the issue. It might be a start, but it won't solve the issue. And one of the reasons why people are not really keen on becoming president of the German Football Association is because people simply know that there is a World Cup coming and it's really close. And people will ask, what did the German Football Association do during the pandemic? Oh, you flew all across Europe to do your games during a global pandemic. Yeah. And oh, by the way, what about World Cup in Qatar and human rights? Oh, you wore T-shirts where it says you support human rights. Well, that's generous. So you still play there? Yeah. No boycott? Very interesting. So there are just many issues coming up. And the issues are getting worse, not only in the association world. Commerzbank, German bank, now says that the whole second level of leadership, they all have to reapply for their jobs. Of course, that is a means to cut jobs. Certain people already got deals signed where they either got payment and leave the organization or they go to retirement earlier. However, it's just really interesting to see no one on the first leadership level has to reapply. Only on the second leadership level has to reapply. When you look at the diversity on that leadership level, it's exactly as you expect. It is not very diverse, of course not. They didn't even announce how many jobs are available on the second level of leadership. So it is, again, completely non-transparent. And by the way, Commerzbank is cutting jobs in Germany. In Germany, every third job will go away. So while cutting brutally on lower levels, the second leadership level has the generosity to reapply. And by the way, this reapply for your job thing, which is a system that comes from the United States. Even most American companies don't do that anymore because talent simply wants to have a certain level of security. When you want to tell people every year you have to reapply for your job, people will simply go somewhere else because they will simply think, I have no job security. No one is really appreciating what I do. Every year I have to prove again why I'm here. So how do I ever want to start a family or maybe own a house, get a mortgage for that? It simply will not happen. And by the way, in Europe, this kind of reapply every year is legally not possible. And it's completely correct that it's not possible. And as you know, I am in the liberal conservative area, so I am in favor of less regulation, but I'm not in favor of pure insanity of the corporate world. And last but not least, in Germany, you probably know a textile company called Trigema pronounced when you buy them outside Germany. They produce in Germany, which is rare in the textile industry, and the owner has done a lot of things right. With 79 years old, he's still the only shareholder and owner and the CEO, which is problematic when it comes to planning for the future. However, he now said he doesn't need home office, which means he doesn't need a work from home culture or policy. He doesn't even need a work from anywhere culture because he needs people around him. Otherwise, it all becomes very lonely and it feels a bit like he's already retired. And here's an important message once more. It is not about you in leadership. Just last week, Statista, the most reliable company for proper data, published a survey where they asked people, how do you look into the future of your work? And 2/3 do not want to return on a full on-site job. And only 10%, by the way, really want to go back to a office on-site only thing. 2% only. 2% want to return to the office. 10% wouldn't mind if they were forced to do so. So pretty much 2/3 don't want to go back to the old usual, and 2/3, more than half, up to 2/3, consider or immediately will apply somewhere else if you don't stick to their wishes, or at least give them some sort of flexibility. Large corporations already adapted to that. And now you have someone from a very important German company, an owner of that company, saying, I need people around me, and that's why we don't have work from home or work from anywhere culture. That is as unsustainable as it can be. And once more, the organization will get hit with the employer. And by the way, the owner, Mr. Grupp, has done many things right. Even at the peak of the crisis, he said, in good times, I profit more from my employees. In bad times, I profit less. However, he never applied for a state loan. He never applied for any kind of furlough money. He never applied for any kind of public funding. And by the way, that's a strategy I do as well. He just does it on a way larger level with thousands of employees. When I became self-employed, I always told myself, I am not taking a single penny from the state. First, when I am in the liberal conservative political area where I'm in favor of less regulation and lower taxation, all to a sane amount, not this insanity that some libertarians say, I cannot on the one hand claim less taxation, less regulation, and then expect the state to help me first. So this is exactly what he does as well. He says, I'm not accepting state money because I don't want to I don't want to be dependent from the state. And I can totally understand that. Although I would be entitled to do so, I didn't get a single penny of funding from the state during the whole time of the pandemic. Fortunately, I am in the position that I did my numbers. I am Northern German, and we might be very conservative with that. But savings is a part of the strategy which we have in that part. And I grew up there. So you always plan for the worst thing to happen, which of course puts some capital aside and you can't invest it in your business. We can discuss that another time. But I didn't have any issues during the global pandemic because I simply had enough savings. So very important now is when you talk about a work from home or work from anywhere culture, it's not about you. If you honestly want to return to the old on-site only model, it is not going to work. And you have to be aware of the fact that whatever you do, when you focus on only your model will be the right one, you will fail. You need flexibility, work from home, work from anywhere. Otherwise, talent will simply apply somewhere else where they offer the flexibility they want. So how can you do better? Because of course we always say, how can you do better? And what are the core issues here? So first core issues is anyone likes to talk about change, for example, work from home, work from anywhere, but no one wants to act. So you want something, but then you don't put the topic on the table. This is not very helpful. And problem number 2 is people immediately find an excuse why they cannot do it. I just give you an example which you might know from home if you live with someone else. Let's just say it is a nice afternoon and you are eating an apple. After you finish the apple, there's a bit of the apple left and you go to the bin. You throw it in the bin and you realize the bin is full. And what you say then is the following phrase. Someone should get the bins out, or someone should bring the trash out. Well, someone probably means not you, correct? So you address an issue and at the same time you say, I'm not available here to help. That is not helpful at all. So first you have to address the issue and then please offer help. And the weirdest part of that is many people like to implement a change as long as it's for their own benefit. But not only do they deny any change which is not for their benefit, they openly block any change which is undeniably correct and needs to be done, but which is to their own disadvantage. And it is the worst that leaders still implement changes and say, oh, this has only advantages. And when they see that other people have a disadvantage from it, they simply ignore the issue. Sometimes these changes are not in your favor. And I know this is a very hard time. I've been affected by it when I had my first job after university, and there was a change in health laws. I worked for a pharmaceutical company, and then they simply had to make tough the decision, which, by the way, led to a self-employment which I never thought I will ever have. So when you look at these situations, and it was Neil deGrasse Tyson who said, when you still deny something which is undeniably true, it is not a personal opinion, it is just a personal delusion. So when you see something is factually correct, don't stick to your personal delusions. Simply be honest and say that it's a change that needs to be done. But of course, you might need help. I'm available for this help. I told this before. I can do training for your company or coaching, consulting, mentoring. I told that to you before. Project interim management or speak at your events. Feel free to sign up for the Expert Excellence, which comes out every week with free articles, by the way. The only way, some people, that is something which I forgot in the beginning. Some people sent me an email and said they are reading my leadership magazine, which I publish on medium.com. And they saw that 3 articles per month are free, but I publish more than that. That's true. And they want to have it for free. Because otherwise you have to pay medium.com and the money doesn't go straight to me. I only get a certain share from these $5 you pay, depending on the amount of minutes you spend on my profile and on my articles. Normally I receive $1 to $3 per month, so that's nothing I will get rich from. So when you want to have it for free, just sign up expert.nb-networks.com and you get access to these articles for free. Because when you go via the Expert Excellence email I send every week, then it is free access for all of you, no matter how many articles you read. Getting back to the issue, how can we do better, is always what we say in the end. And we have a fantastic interview partner here this week. I can tell you, someone who not only addressed issues, but went through years, probably decades, of facing strong challenges, discrimination. And he really not only offered help and addressed the issues, but also went through all challenges you could possibly think of. And someone who just recently received the British Empire Medal for his job and his actions as an activist. So I'm going to tell you more about that in a minute. But first we get back to the topic, how can we do better? So first, address the change, but you address it based on facts, and you will not be on a so-called mission or put your ideology forward. No ideologies, no missions. You only focus on facts when you present that. Second, when you present it, expect that there will be resistance, because people who are decision makers in your organization, they do their job for a while and they are reasonably convinced that they do it well. And most likely they even do, so you need to expect that they have questions about it. Deal well with these objections and don't expect a success with your first try. Sometimes you have an idea and they turn it down because the idea needs more work and you have to come back. And that it might need a first try, second try, third, fourth, fifth try. Don't give up. When you see they are only putting you off without giving you a reason, that is where you can go to step 3, and that means getting external help. External help could be me, could be the unions, could be a lawyer, could be anyone. As you just saw with the examples I gave you about the university, when students didn't get help, they simply put it on the open internet, where it just exploded and suddenly the university was willing to talk. So when people just put you off or even openly discriminate against you, then of course you have every right to address that in public. But very important is you address it internally first. So how to do it better? Talk about the change based on facts, not a mission, not ideology, facts. Then expect that there will be objections or resistance and address the issue so you can overcome that. Don't expect that you succeed on the first try. It is normal that people question when there is a significant change to be implemented, that they simply want to be sure that your idea is viable. And aspect number 3 of how to do it better, when nothing else works and they openly have a go at you and only put you off, then of course you have every right to simply put this to public. And now just imagine someone who is not growing up in a prestigious and rich family. And that is the person we have as an interview partner today. It's someone whose name you might have read in press recently, Rhammel, Afflick, an activist from London who didn't grow up in rich circumstances, got his qualification, got his job, and now is active in the area of diversity. He's one of the most long-standing members of London Pride, however, stepped down recently due to the fact that London Pride had severe issues. He called them out after he addressed everything internally and nothing happened. He called them out publicly, and as a consequence, multiple directors had to step down. He's still an activist. He recently received the British Empire Medal, which is one of the highest honors you can receive in the country, for being an activist and being an active part of a good cause, while at the same time, with his background, he had to face multiple actions against him, discrimination against him. So someone who truly, and in a very impressive way, stood up for a good cause. And by the way, he doesn't make money from it. It's not that he got rich from it. It ended up on TV being the host of the Next One show. This is someone who I'm so impressed of that I truly can tell you this is probably the best guest we could get for the 1-year anniversary of this podcast. So of course, after we now spend time together for 1 year and you listen to me talking for 1 year, which is already impressive enough. Thank you very much for that. I have to thank you. First, I have to say thank you very much for listening to me today. It was again one of the longer podcasts because the issues are getting more and more severe. And when we are now entering the new normal, I receive way more emails than before, and we will get into this in a good way. I'm very happy to help your organization. Just drop me an email and we're going to have a chat about that. But it is important to address this issue on the podcast publicly and have a discussion with you. I am incredibly thankful that you are following me for that long time. You find out, by the way, some people ask if the old episodes will disappear. No, they won't. You can still download and listen to all the older episodes before, of course. But now it is time to focus on someone who has done way more than probably I will ever do in my life. Someone who has achieved activism on a level which focuses on the good cause and helps so many people who need help but did not have a voice before he stepped up. I'm talking about Rhammel Afflick, who's with me here today. So at the end, after saying thank you very much for your time, there's only one thing I have to add right now, and that is we now head straight to the interview. Activism. You might know someone who has done something very well, and you might know people who worked in charities for quite a while, but probably you have never met someone like the guest we have today. He is an activist since he is 11 years old, and in the 2021 New Year's Honours, he received the British Empire Medal. Hello and welcome, Rhammel Afflick.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much for taking the time, and I'm getting straight into the topic. What drove you at the age of 11 to get involved with politics? Because let's face it, most people at the age of 11 have any kind of interest, but not activism, not politics. Most people aren't even remotely interested in anything like that at the age of 11.
Yeah, I think that when I reflect back, I definitely didn't have an interest in formal politics at the age of 11. But I guess as a young black boy growing up in London, had already experienced injustice and things that I felt were wrong. I found that, I guess, a vehicle that enabled me to really speak out on the issues that I cared about. And of course, for me, that became, the relationship between the police in London and young black men in particular. And so I guess a journey started from there when I guess, accompanied a lot of other young people who had similar visions for things being different for young people in London and across the UK. So, I guess I fell into it by mistake, and then realized that actually, there were a lot of issues that I was passionate about, and there was a lot that I could contribute in the form of both critique, but also solutions.
When you just mentioned formal politics, would you ever be interested in going into, let's say, Labour Party or any kind of political movement to become an MP or anything similar?
Yeah, I've been asked this question many times, especially when I was 11. If I'm honest, I don't know if I. Certainly not anytime soon. Anyway, is the first thing I would say. But I do pause and reflect on the way that politicians, and particularly people of color, let alone openly bi people, are treated in political spaces. Whether that be colleagues within political spaces or the wider public at large. I've already had my fair share of experience of vitriol, just with the the bits of media that I've done over the last kind of decade, and that would probably only be a small snapshot of what I'd experience if I was to become an MP. So am I jumping at the opportunity? Not really, but do I feel that I need to contribute in that way, to contribute to society? Not necessarily. And I think that's what's been nice for me. I don't think I need to have been center stage in that way, I guess, to still be effective and still challenge, what needs to be changed.
When we talk about things that need to be changed, many people who I talked to when I prepared this interview, many of them said they know you and they have been involved in activism, but there was the certain moment where they simply said they just couldn't go on anymore. Either it was the job or they started their family. They just accepted things as they are. You are now an activist for 16 years and you're 27 years of age when my information is correct.
Yes.
So how do you make it? Because the more you get involved in activism, the more you will get attacked. And in times of social media, you will receive most likely very unacceptable messages from many different people. How do you motivate yourself to keep going?
Yeah, I guess I've surrounded myself with lots of people who are doing similar things, who have similar passions to me. And I guess we're a great support of each other. And that's definitely really helpful and has been particularly helpful, more recently with, my highly charged exit from Pride in London. But also, I think that quite often people can look to very specific people or very specific individuals, at least, as a source of inspiration. But quite often, I believe that you can find inspiration in, in the most kind of odd places that when maybe you're not necessarily expecting it. But also, I think that I think if anyone involved in activism has to have the patience of a saint, because a lot of activism is repetition. I reflect on a tweet actually that was favorited a few weeks ago, which I paused for a second and I thought, oh gosh, what's this? From 2015, where I was talking to someone about intersectionality, a term that's only really been popularized in the last two years. And it just goes to show that how many, Black activists or other activists, go on about the same things. And sometimes it takes years before ideas and frameworks and different ways of doing things become popularized. So, I think that you can't get into, into kind of these spaces without, I guess, an expectation that there will be pushback. There will be, there will be moments of exhaustion, of stress, but actually that in the end it all becomes worthwhile because we do still see some change, and I think that's what keeps me going.
Talking about Pride in London, I mean, of course, you know that I prepared this interview, and I think you were aware that I'm going to address Pride in London because that made it on international news, The Guardian, into very well respected media, and also the mayor of London intervened personally, which I think underlines how much attention this issue brought in. And could you tell us from your point of view what happened with Pride of London? Because I know that you were a volunteer and you were with Pride in London for nearly 10 years, I think 7 or 8 years. And at the end, you were their director of communications and one of the most senior figures in the whole organization.
Yeah, I guess that there were systemic issues spanning a whole, I focused very specifically on my own experiences of racism and the way in which it was manifesting in the organization, namely its treatment of volunteers, not necessarily just me, but also in terms of its offer back out to people of color within LGBT communities. And so those were the issues that I could speak to most because because of my experiences of racism in society generally and in other workplaces and spaces. But there were a plethora of issues really that really underpinned the reason why I left and many others left. And I think that unfortunately we had a quite clear failure of leadership that was almost being masked by what was essentially one of the most diverse boards the organization had seen since its inauguration in 2012. And I felt that, no longer could I allow essentially, my, who I was to mask in some ways what was still continuing to happen in the organization. And so I guess it was a breakdown in trust, but also a recognition, I guess, that under the leadership that was in place, there wasn't the vision or the foresight in a way to even begin to deliver in a way that would include more marginalized voices and women in the way that the organization went forward. And that, for me, is probably, although a very long summary, probably the most succinct summary I can give to summarize what really happened at Pride.
Did you expect that it will get the media attention it got afterwards? Did you expect that kind of reaction of the general public?
If I'm honest, when I spoke to friends in the lead up to announcing, I had to say what I had to say in the full knowledge that nobody might not pay attention, and that I may pay, a huge cost potentially to my own career, or into friendships, etc. And that in itself was stressful. But I knew that at least I could do so, knowing that I was doing it for the right reasons and because it was necessary. So did I expect it? Not entirely. But am I surprised now upon reflection? No, because I think that these issues were, as I kind of have described already, were there in plain sight. It wasn't a kind of, it was almost, as I have also described it, an open secret amongst people of color who have engaged in or have been part of Pride in London over the last 7 years. And you'll notice that many others did choose to, those who had been involved previously did choose to speak out, but many didn't, because of course, it is very difficult to come out and to be so direct about your experiences, and quite often as a way of dealing with what often becomes trauma, essentially. People don't want to acknowledge the issues that they've faced so publicly. So there were a whole. It's far more complex, I think, than just writing a blog. Although not everyone may be able to appreciate that.
Certainly is.
Yeah. I had to find the right form of words to, I guess, articulate to those who, with the full knowledge that it would trigger some people who had been through difficult things, but also in a way that allowed people who perhaps were not, none the wiser to these issues to pick up and grasp exactly what it was that I was getting at. And I think that was perhaps more difficult than the worry about who would and wouldn't support what I was saying.
And you got quite prominent support. I remember that the Mayor of London, as I said before, The Guardian, one of the most respected newspapers, Owen Jones, mentioned you personally on Twitter and also, of course, stood by you. And he's one of the, I think, with the highest profile in the UK when it comes to political activism, especially in this area. However, two chairmen stepped down. I think more than 40 volunteers left London Pride. And now you did something which I fully support, because I have the same approach as you do. You called for a complete overhaul to increase trust in communities. Other people, however, and that's what London Pride then did, is they refused to do so. They say that people stepped down and now we try to move on. Why do you call? And I fully support that step. However, could you explain why do you call for a complete overhaul for the organization?
I think that the reason I've been very specific is, first of all, because one of the things that I was really clear in my in what I wrote and published was that this was very specifically a failure in leadership. So this wasn't about every volunteer who had ever been part of Pride. I've met some fantastic people, some people who will probably remain my friends forever through Pride in London. This was very specifically about the leadership of the organization and the overhang, as I've described, of kind of lack of trust, of upset from previous decisions or engagements with other people. And in order to break away from those things, and to kind of have a clean slate, as it were, it does need that overhaul. It does need fresh insight. But more importantly, it needs someone who has the vision to deliver a pride that kind of that does really speak to all parts of our communities. And I think that for me was the most damning part. It's not just the kind of the incidents of bullying that people have spoken to, etc. It's also very specifically about how we address the issues, and at least having the vision to enable that to happen. And if you don't have the vision to enable a pride that really does, effectively deliver for everyone, then that's the time to step down and to move on, and to allow those who do have those fresh ideas and a fresh approach to step up and do something. And I think that is what's really crucial now.
Excellent. And I know that you professionally lead award-winning campaigns as well, because you work as a freelance consultant as well. What do you do when you help other organizations in getting better in what they try to achieve? Because let's face it, most organizations to the outside say, oh, we want to focus on diversity, etc. When you look on the inside of these organizations, they are anything but diverse. So look into the city of London, or when you sit on the tube going to Canary Wharf in the morning in London, you don't see much diversity. We have to be honest with that. So what is it you do professionally in your freelance consultant work?
Yeah, I guess my key focus in that is that I mean, there's a two-pronged approach. Although I say two-pronged, there's still a lot within those two prongs. The first, I think, is to address the social deficit that you might have with certain communities, and to address that head on. So what is it, when we really unpack the history of the organization, do we need to address? What is it that we need to acknowledge and move away from? And I say reflect on the company's history, but it's wider than that. Actually, it can also be a reflection on the industry's relationship with certain communities. And I think that's an important starting point, because I think you can have all these well-intentioned initiatives or whatever it is that you want to put forward, but actually if people feel you haven't addressed some of those historical issues that still permeate through people's minds, then of course you're not likely to get very far. So I think that's the first thing. Okay. And the second thing I've been really, really clear about is that organizations need to address this idea that actually D&I work, as it's obviously called in most corporates in the UK, has to be uncomfortable in order for it to be effective. So this idea that many people who have quite often traditionally felt comfortable in most situations might, for just one day or just one moment, feel uncomfortable in addressing maybe perhaps some of the problematic decisions or behaviors that they commit that harm other employees in the workplace. And I use the word harm very specifically because I do believe that sometimes we don't address that even some of the most small kind of microaggressions, as we call them, can contribute
Absolutely.
to trauma and to adverse experiences. And so needs to be a conversation about uncomfortableness. And then the second kind of part of that conversation has to be about disruption and challenge. And quite often, I think that we've kind of framed all of this as being quite, about allyship, and it all sounds very fluffy. But in reality, what is necessary is challenge and disruption. And if we don't prepare people for that challenge, for that disruption, then of course we can't expect people to actually want to deliver differently, because they'll immediately, if your back's up. And I think that sometimes by suggesting that it's a space to ask stupid questions. Yes, of course, I'm not saying we should never ask stupid questions, but not without acknowledging what some of those stupid questions might do in the form of harm to other people. And I think too often, there's not an agreement, as it were, between the parties on that kind of on those bases. So those are the two real key things for me: is addressing those kind of previous things that have created social deficits, and then the second piece around uncomfortableness and disruption. Those are key things. Otherwise, it's pointless, really.
Excellent. This is excellent advice. When we now have people, and let's round this interview up, when we now have people who are listening to this and say, I really need to do something, either it's in my private life, my community, or in my organization or my corporate office. And then they're sitting there, they most likely will not be on a board level. They might be, but the vast majority of the people cannot decide directly to put actions into place. And they might have one question on their mind, and they simply think where to start. How can I find the right start to convince people to implement proper and sustainable change? So to round this interview up, what are Rhammel Afflick's top 3 tips how to get started when you want to have sustainable and proper change, either in your organization or society?
Yeah, I guess the first thing I think people have to address is the need for a kind of proactive learning, and this suggestion that actually, it's a journey, and it's a journey. You don't just arrive at a station and suddenly understand everything. It is a journey. It's something that you have to play. Plays out in the long run, I guess. And the second thing is that in acknowledging that these issues are systemic and are underpinned by processes and all sorts of things that essentially hold the status quo in place. I think sometimes we address dismantling some of this stuff as being, quite piecemeal. So, I don't know, you donate tomorrow, or you challenge somebody who's done something problematic on a Thursday, and then great, you've done something. But I think it would be more. I think it would make more sense to compare addressing racism or transphobia or homophobia or biphobia or any of these adversities as comparing. I think it would be more astute to kind of compare it to brushing your teeth. You don't brush your teeth once every couple of months. You brush them every day because it's an acknowledgement that is necessary. And I think the analogy works in the same way for racism, in that quite often, and more often than not, Black people don't have the choice, for example, in addressing racism, in choosing whether or not to address these things, because in some circumstances it's a case of life or death, not necessarily for ourselves, but perhaps for others. And I think when you start to realize that that's what it feels like for some people, and we're not homogenous, not everyone feels that, but certainly many people will feel that, then I think you can start to really kind of appreciate just how much work is needed to actually address the issues that are being put forward. So yeah, absolutely, those would be my 3 things.
Excellent. Rhammel, I remember still when we met first in the LGBT scene in London. So I think it was at Heaven, and I follow you ever since. And I can only say that you are an inspiration to far more people than you can imagine. I can tell you that what you've done, especially when it comes to equality in many areas, reached far beyond London, far beyond the UK. Because as I told you at the beginning of the interview, I saw the news about London Pride on BBC World News, and when I was sitting here thousands of miles away from London, where I am right now when I'm recording this. So at the end of this interview, of course, I have to thank you for everything you've done for society, for London, for the UK, for, of course, all the movements you're part of. And at the end of this interview, there's only one thing for me left to say. Rhammel, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for listening to me and hearing me out. And, all I would say, I guess, is to those listening, is that there are many voices with worthwhile things to say, and not all of them have titles or accolades. And so, all I can say is just to seek out and to find as many different voices as you can to challenge your school of thought. And then I guess you might be on the path to something.
Thank you.